Thank you for inviting me on to this Meet the Hiring Manager lunchtime session. I knew Joanna from way back when I worked for Stanley Life Aberdeen, so I was delighted to say yes. I thought I'd call it something a bit different from your normal boring presentation title, so I called it Being John Malkovich. Now, I don't know if anybody is an avid movie fan or anybody went and Googled it, but this is a bit of fun to start, really. Being John Malkovich was a movie from 1999, and it stars John Malkovich as himself. He's an actor, American actor, and it also has Cameron Diaz and John Cusack in it. So it was very well received, had nominated for 3 Academy Awards, 4 BAFTA Awards, but it's a story about Craig Swartz, who's played by John Cusack, who gets a job on the 7th and a half floor of this office block in New York as a filing clerk. And while he's there filing, he finds this hidden door in the back of a filing cabinet, and it leads to a small tunnel. And he goes down this tunnel and he finds himself in the mind of John Malkovich. And then after 50 minutes of being in the mind of John Malkovich and seeing the world from John Malkovich's point of view, he gets thrown out on the Jersey Turnpike. So the story of the movie is like Craig realizes he can actually sell this experience for profit. So he starts charging people to go into the mind of John Malkovich, and it kind of all goes from there. Definitely worth a watch if you're into kind of weird comedy movies and like that sort of thing, which I do. Google it, definitely worth a watch. But there's no tunnels required for this presentation, but you can get into my mind. So that was the idea. The analogy is try and think, get into my head when I'm a hiring manager, what I'm thinking of and what over the hiring process. So that's what I'm going to do. I thought we'd lighten the presentation up to start with a bit of something interesting, a bit more interesting than this boring stuff. So about me, when I was writing this slide, I realized I've been in the technology industry for 32 years. So which makes me some sort of really old dog. But I started in 1990 at a company called ICI, which at the time was a huge, big industrial company, one of the biggest in the UK, Imperial Chemical Industries. So I started as systems analyst in their computing department. And over the years, I've moved through a whole variety of roles and companies, from startups, software startups, literally within 10 people in the software company, through to my last role was at JP Morgan. JP Morgan's got 240,000 people in it. So I've have experience of the whole remit, from tiny startup to massive organization. And my background, I kind of worked through a whole variety of roles. I've been systems analyst to start with, and I moved into kind of software development work. Then from there, I kind of moved into technical leading a team of developers, software engineers. Then I moved into the kind of architecture side, solutions architecture originally, started to focus more and more on data. Moved into a dedicated data architect role about 2010 or so. And then went through a kind of lead principal data architect, and then ended up as head of data architect for Stanley Life Investments in Edinburgh, which is now Aberdeen. I've also, my last role was actually, after I left them in 2020, I went and joined JP Morgan, and in their corporate investment bank payment section. So I headed up data architecture for JP Morgan Payments. So that's the kind of my background, big variety of background over many years. And I've seen the industry kind of evolve and different technologies rise and disappear. Now I'm a kind of independent contractor and having a break at the moment. So we'll see what happens next year. I was just telling Joe I'm off to Australia in a week's time. I'm looking forward to it. So that's me. Long history in technology industry, and I've seen a lot, I think. So what am I going to talk about today? So the title was Meet the Hiring Manager. So I thought I'll try and give you some of my insights that I've had over the years, recruiting and hiring people through a variety of roles and building and developing teams. So I'm just trying to give you my insights, what I'm thinking, how I do things, what I like to see, what I don't like to see. So I thought I'd start off though with a little bit of chat about the roles I see in the data space. This has changed dramatically. So I thought I'd kind of talk a little bit about some of the data related roles and how they've evolved over time. Then I thought I'd give you some insight into the CV, putting together a CV, reading the roles descriptions, what I've seen on the interview process and the interviews, and then how I prepare for interviews, what I'm thinking, what I'm looking for, how I run an interview. So just to try and give you an insight and hopefully give you some pointers and some help from my perspective based on my experience over quite many hundreds of interviews probably I've done in my past, I would say. Health warning, right? I'm not an HR professional, so I'm not professing this to be an HR discussion. This is purely based on my experience, what's worked, what's not within hiring. So I've hired many people and I built teams up and developed teams across a number of different organizations of different sizes, but I'm not an HR professional. So just health warning on that. And I'd also like this to be a little bit more of a discussion rather than me just droning on. So if you've got questions on any slides, just jump in. The slides are designed as notes. So they're not the kind of like little tiny bullet points. They are almost fully notes. And my idea on doing that was I'll give you these slides afterwards. And if you want to, you can put them up on your site and you can go through them. So you don't need to kind of make notes as you go with your points because all the slides are fairly well documented. They're going to be well based on what I'm talking about, but they're not just little bullet points. So hopefully it will be useful. And, you know, if I can provide some information that's useful for your job searches, your career changes, then I've done my job. Okay, so time to get to my head then. So data. Lots and lots of roles in the data space now. So the technology sector is an absolute master in creating job titles, right? So they morph constantly, constant new job titles in this space, many variations of these job titles, but these are the kind of ones I'm seeing popping up a lot. I've just got a message. Participants can see your application. You have been able to see my slides as I've been going, haven't you? Yeah, yeah, okay. That's just so I'm seeing the various kind of ones entitled data something. So data architect, that's been around for a long time. Data engineer, that's actually quite a new role, but it's really big at the moment. So it really started to emerge in about 2015 or so, when cloud computing really started to go mainstream. And when they started to use kind of cloud-based data pipelining technologies, data ETL technologies, and they called them data engineers. So if I picked some of these graphs off here just to kind of illustrate the point. These are all from IT Jobs Watch, which there's a link there, the URL. I use IT Jobs Watch extensively. It's a great resource for seeing all the different roles out there, the salaries, how the distribution of salaries, the kind of contract rates, permanent salary rates. You can type in roles and you can see how the job openings have gone over time. So I recommend go and have a look at it. It's always a really interesting resource. But here I've brought up data engineer and this one here. And you can see, you know, from about 2015, it didn't really exist. And now it's exploded. So, I mean, so data engineering is a technical role. It's building data pipelines primarily on cloud-based platforms. Massive area. Great area to go into if you like being technical. Here's your data architect roles, chuntering along. It did exist. Has increased, but not like data engineering. Data governance. Again, really interesting because data governance isn't that technical, really. So you go from data engineering, which is very technical, you'll be using particular ETL, data pipelining tool technologies, through to data governance. All the time they're data governance analysts, they're looking at data quality. But you see how they've taken off from like 2008, post post-financial crash, actually again exploded. And the reason this is happening is because a lot of big organizations have to get control of their data, and the regulators are telling them. So my last role was with JP Morgan, and that was a heavily regulated business. And we had significant data governance initiatives in place because the regulator expected us to have that in place. So that's a big area, and it's an area that, you know, you don't need to be a technical coder to work in this space. It's much more likely if you're an analyst bent, logical, you can work in that space and have a very profitable and interesting career. So, you know, just illustrating how these roles have kind of morphed and changed over time. The other ones that I've listed, you know, you've got the various head of roles, which you see out there. Head of BI, data warehousing, analytics. There's various flavors of that. It all depends on what the scope of that role is. Head of data architecture, which is obviously my last two roles were called head of data architecture. Head of data science. Data science is a massive area, of course. Big data, data science, very trendy. Head of data, you quite sometimes see. And it's similar to chief data officer, which I've listed down there, but often a bit of more of a smaller organization. They don't quite warrant a CDO, but they want someone to head up their data, cross-cutting data function. So my message is there's loads of stuff to go at in the data space. There's roles that vary from very technical roles to not that technical at all, and then everything in between. The growth across the whole piece, but health warning, the roles titles, they don't necessarily tell you what the role, the remit of the role and the skills required of the role. So read the role profile. You have to read the role profile. Don't go off the title, because even for similar title roles, it can vary dramatically in terms of the skill sets and competencies they require. So lots of variety, but read the role profile. So that's my kind of, that's what I'm seeing in the data space and how it's evolved over the years. So I wanted next, if there's no other question, there's no questions at this point, I'll talk a wee bit about the CV. Because the CV is your starting point, it's your shop front. And it needs to be well crafted and well thought through. I've seen all kinds of CVs in my time. I think I've lost, you need to put some effort into them. I've lost count of CVs that have got spelling mistakes on them, that have got bad grammar on them, that aren't formatted properly. You can't have that. I mean, this is your shop front. This is you presenting yourself. This is good. And once you need to realize it, you send it off to a recruitment consultant, put in a job, then you lose control of it. It goes, it can get moved around the organization, passed across from HR to hiring manager. They might distribute internally saying, I can't use this person, but maybe you can. So it is something that represents you. So put some effort in. My preference, I've got a preference for how I structure this. I prefer a CV's got a kind of summary paragraph, which is really kind of highlighting you in one paragraph, where are your skills, what you're good at, what your experience is. It's quite hard writing that sort of, this is me in one paragraph. Then a section listing the skills and knowledge that you've got. And I normally put that in because it will catch any sort of automated skill search routines that's going on. If they're kind of trying to go, and I just need somebody who knows about SSIS or this, or AWS or something. So it just makes sure that the words are in there to catch up those word searches. I then go through experience highlights in reverse chronological order, and again putting here's you've got your role, and here's what you did in that role, and you use positive action words. You define the data architecture for the organization, you built this particular system, you developed this. So positive words all the way through. And then finally, the last two sections, like final page, really put your educational details in. You need to have it. It has to be truthful, because that will all be checked. If you get a job offer, they'll do a search, and if it's not And if it's not, if you've made it up, you won't get a job. And also relevant details like things like visa status and nationality. So this is quite an interesting one, especially nowadays. But you know, if you're on a sponsored visa, and I quite often I'll be interviewing people who are on a sponsored visa with a current employer. So I need to know that, because that would mean that we as an employer would need to sponsor you, and there's a cost associated with that. I shouldn't be finding that out in the interview. I should know that before I go into the interview. So just get that out there. It's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, it's JP Morgan had a policy of that's fine, we'll just pay for, you know, to get to sponsor people, sponsor their visas, but we just need to know it. You can have multiple kind of flavors of CV. I've got at least two, one which is more kind of hands-on roles and one is more head of roles, and you're just emphasizing certain different aspects. As long as you manage them, keep them separate, so you know which one is which, and distribute them. And that ties to another point, is always keep a copy of the CV you've sent out for particular roles, because when you interview for that role, you need a copy in front of you of the exact CV that went out. Now, I don't know if you guys are like me, but you know, I'll tweak CVs, I'll maybe add, maybe I can reword something. So they evolve through versions. If you're doing this interview, it might be a number of versions ago that you sent the CV out. So you need a copy of exactly what the hiring manager's got in front of them. So just manage that. In terms of the kind of formats of CVs, I've seen all kinds of sorts. So I've seen kind of grids and columns. I prefer just, I find them quite hard to read. I prefer just text, bullet points, easier to read. Don't recommend you put a photo on. I have seen that quite a lot, but it's an unconscious bias considerations. You shouldn't do that at this point, you know. So no photos would be my recommendation. Don't get fancy with radar charts and gauges. I've seen all this sort of stuff. You know, I've seen radar charts trying to show me how good you are and how good this particular candidate feels they are in particular skills. And I kind of go, I'll find that out during the interview. I don't want you to try and tell me. And anyway, it's just taking up a whole big chunk of your CV. So you need to keep it down. So don't try and be fancy. You don't need to stand out by doing something different on the CV. If you see what I mean. You don't need to make the CV look weird to try and make you stand out. A good hiring manager will read. They will read the CV. They'll read at least the first 2 pages, I would say. Look and they'll skim across it. Other questions, I think, avoid any jargon phrases. You know, I used to have a point, if somebody was starting to use jargon in a CV, I'd always ask them what they meant, because I'd always kind of go, what does that mean? If I was a technology professional, I was going, I don't really think they know what they're talking about. So I would always hone in and always ask them about, so what do you mean by that then? And of course, if they didn't really have a very good answer, I went, well, they're just putting stuff in there to try and sound impressive. So just generally be prepared to be questions on anything on your CV. So you need to be able to talk coherently across the whole of your CV, confident across the whole of your CV. And whenever you're being talking about what you did, why you did it, what experience you learned, rather than what the team did, what the organization did. It's what you did, because I'm wanting to find out about you rather than about the organization that you work for. So that's the kind of CV. There's a bit of an art to CVs, and I'm sure you've all kind of had bashes at it, but that's my views on what makes a better CV. Any particular questions, or shall I move on?
There's one in the chat actually there, John, from Mary. She says, so grid/table is hard for ATS, but I've seen engineers using that format and getting work. She says she sticks to text like a simple CV, but is thinking of adding a portfolio maybe to the second page now. Do you think that's kind of a good idea as well?
I'm not saying that if you format them in different ways, you won't find work, to be honest. What I'm giving you is my opinion on what makes a better CV. This is my opinion. Technical roles, I use technical roles, they're kind of perhaps more interested in specific hard skills. So they're wanting specific kind of what particular skills have you got in this area, AWS, Azure, blah, 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 this. And you can put that on a grid. And it works fine. But I tend to prefer text and bullet points. So yeah, and in terms of pages, how many pages, I would tend to have the summary and the skills on the first, and then maybe a summary of your achievements, highlights on your second page, and then maybe your last, your most current experience, and then the next page, maybe 4 pages maximum, depending on how much experience you've got and want to emphasize. So yeah, like all this stuff, there's no definitive right or wrong. So it's just what makes it easier. And I think we are quite lucky in many ways in the data space, because there's a lot of work out there. So even if you do a complete dog's breakfast CV, you might very well find work, to be honest, because there's so much, especially if you get the CV and you're actually quite good in the interview. So I mean, the CV effectively is trying to get you that interview, isn't it? It's trying to push enough buttons so you get into that interview. Once you get into that interview, then you can impress. Then you've got through the door, effectively.
Cool. Okay. I've actually got just a quick one, John, as well. Just in terms of what about your opinion on cover letters and stuff like that? Was there stuff in the CV you maybe would leave out or save for if you're asking, looking for a specific?
I'm not finding.
Thanks.
It's an interesting question. It does depend on the recruitment process you go through. So sometimes when you apply for jobs, especially through some of the job sites and things like that, they do have kind of, do you want to put a message to the recruiter? I would always put something in there, and what I would try and do is look at the role profile, and we'll talk about the roles, and I would try and pull out specifically why I might be of interest for that the hiring managers to talk to me. So but I wouldn't put it relatively short and punchy. Some recruitment processes don't let you do that. So JP Morgan had a very rigid one and wouldn't let you put a cover letter in. You had to apply, you just sent the CV in and that was it. So it does vary, but if I had a chance, I would put some sort of cover note or cover letter to go with my CV, because I was trying to focus somebody in on why I should be interviewed for that role. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. So role descriptions. Role descriptions are really easy. You see enormous variety of role descriptions. Read it well. You don't have to have all the skills, I would say, but there's this kind of critical mass you need to get to actually start to be of interest, I think, for a hiring manager. So I said there, hiring managers have a lot of CVs to go through. Speculative CVs aren't really very helpful. So I think be selective with them. So try and think about mentally, have I got enough critical mass of the skills and knowledge and competencies that this role obviously requires to get to that critical mass? So I would have a good chance of getting an interview. And speculative CVs are not really, just spraying them out, I don't think it works. I think fewer, more targeted applications are better. And feel for the hiring manager. I mean, I've hired it, if you're a hiring manager and you end up with 35 CVs, it's almost impossible to go through them. This is where sometimes recruitment consultants are really useful. And it depends on the organization. So JP Morgan didn't like using recruitment consultants because recruitment consultants are very expensive. So they take a big chunk of money. If they place someone, it can be £30,000, depending, it can be a huge chunk of money that they take, percentage of the first year's salary. So people like JP Morgan didn't really like using recruitment consultants because of the cost. But on the flip side, that meant that hiring managers tend to just get all the CVs in. So they had to read through them all. So, it's sometimes just, cut a bit of slack to the hiring manager. So be selective, I think. once you think you kind of role profiles of interest and you read through it, find out about where the company is. So, you know, which companies. Just a lot of them through recruitment consultants, they won't have the company. Talk to the recruitment consultant, find out who the company is, and then do a little bit of research. You know, who's the CEO? What's happening? Where are they moving to new markets? Are they making profits or not? Find out why the roles come into being. You know, is it they're expanding to a new area? There's a new business, or is it somebody's resigned, so you're replacing somebody? This is just all really interesting information, because it'll come out later on the interview, I would say. I would always ask it in the interview. I'd always ask about what somebody knew about the company, just so they could evidence that they'd done even the most basic background. And it was I never viewed it as very positive if they didn't know anything about the company at all. I went, really? Least you could do is go up, just Google us and find out what business we're in and what we do. I'll say the final thing. You know, once you found out about a company, think about the role in the company, and are you interested in what they do, and do they align with your values and ethics? And you know, I think this is really important. It's certainly important for me. I mean, technology roles appear in all different types of companies, but if somebody comes up and goes, I've got this great job in a gambling organization based in Gibraltar, you know, and it pays a shed load of money, are you going to be interested or not? You've got to be really clear on what you want and what you don't want. And you know, this applies to lots of different arms manufacturers, tobacco companies. You know, a lot of these things are not, I would say, know your ethical construct, and stick to it, regardless of the money that seems to be dangled, because you can't work with a company that you don't respect and you don't agree with. So that was my message. And I've many times when I've been looking for work and people have turned up, this has happened multiple times actually, and I just went, not interested, don't care how much money it is, not interested, move on. So that's the role descriptions. There's no rhyme nor reason what you see in role descriptions. Sometimes recruitment consultants will kind of craft them quite well. Other times it looks like you know, a detailed job description that comes straight through from the recruiting organization. So you just have to kind of read them and then try and pick through it and work out what the key messages from that role description are. That's role descriptions. Really read them really well. Have a look. I want to talk a bit about selection processes. So you imagine you put your CV in and you're waiting to hear back, but the interview still, from my experience, the primary selection tool. You normally expect the first interview at least to be remote nowadays. And to be honest, quite often the other subsequent interviews can be remote too. It seems to be morphing. It's a moving feast from what I can tell. But find out as much as you can about the interview process and the selection process. So, you know, how many interviews you're going to go through. If they come back and say, look, we're interested, here we would like to give you an interview. Find out how many interviews you're going to have, who are they going to be with. You know, quite often the first one's HR, then it might be, you might be second one with a hiring manager, then it might be a cross-check third one. But there are endless variations here, but it's useful for you to know. Find out whether you need a technical test, because some of them, especially technical roles, will give you a technical test. So it's useful to know that in advance. Some of them I've actually applied for a role where they wanted me to do a presentation. That was a consultancy role. And you know, just know that, because actually that's a lot of effort. So if they asked you, I remember they were asking me to do a presentation on cloud computing and positioning that in the data space, and that's quite a lot of effort to do. So it's useful to know if that's a requirement. In terms of types of interview, you've got your traditional CV sort of centric ones. Let's use the CV as a basis. Let's talk through your experiences based on the CV. I see that, well, I use that most of the time, to be honest. But the other type is behavioral event or competency based. And for government sector roles particularly, this is really common. So, and if you don't know it's coming, it can really throw you. So in competency-based interviews or behavioral event interviews, they'll ask you about, tell me a time when you had to deal with conflict in your team. Tell me a time when you had to influence somebody to do something they didn't really want to do. And they'll pose these sort of scenarios, and you've got to then describe how you handled it and what behaviors you exhibited when you did it. And if you're not ready for that, that can be really off-putting. And it's quite hard to prepare for, because it's almost like they can ask you anything. It's not like you're talking about your skills and experience, which you should have loaded in your head, really. You should just be able to talk about what's on your CV without even having to think about it. Behavioral event can be almost anything. So it's really useful to know whether that's coming. And if it is, try and do as much prep for it as you possibly can. So, I mean, yeah, you just have to try. I will say you get better as you do more. So, you do get better as you do more interviews, especially on some complex interview types like that. Finally, find out who will be interviewing you. Do your research. I always go on LinkedIn. So my default, I'll go on LinkedIn, I'll look them up. And this is really useful, because sometimes you can find out how they're going to approach an interview because of their prior experience or background. So I had an interview recently. It was a contract, data architecture, kind of setting up a data architecture practice in an organization, a financial organization. And they came at it, the chief architect came at it from a very much a data control and governance perspective, which surprised me, because that's not usual. But I did wonder whether that was going to happen, because I researched him on LinkedIn, and he came from a more risk and governance and control background than an architecture background. So I kind of knew that might happen, but just illustrating the fact that sometimes where people are coming from will depend on what they focus on your CV and what kind of angle they'll take. So definitely find out who's interviewing you. And ironically enough, I would quite often see whether people I was interviewing would check me out on LinkedIn too. Have they read my profile? And if they didn't read my profile, go, why haven't they looked at me? They know they're being interviewed by me. I would probably expect them to just at least have a little wee look and just see who this person is. So it's just kind of, it won't take more than 5 minutes, but I would do that. So selection processes, so vary enormously. Just find out as much as you can about what the selection process is, and then try and do as much preparation as you can based on that. And you will get better the more you do it, and the more selection processes you go through, the more types of interview you have. But just try and help yourself at the start by, finding out as much as you can, so you can actually do as much preparation as you can. Does that make sense? Yeah. Do you want to anybody want to pick up anything, or just go off to the next slide? No. Let's talk about interviews then. So what I wanted to do here was talk about, when I'm interviewing someone, how I actually prepare for that interview. So you get in my head, what do I actually think? And the way I do it is, I've obviously got an opening in the team, and I start to form this view up on what's my perfect candidate. I've called it the unicorn candidate there, the perfect candidate. If I had the choice, what would this person look like? What hard technical skills would they have? What softer skills and competence would they have? What kind of gravitas would they have? What's the kind of, and gravitas is really hard to pin down, but it's, can you take them seriously? For senior roles particularly, could I, how much gravitas do they need if I want to put them in front of a C-level exec or a head of, do they need to have that sort of gravitas or not? So I would kind of form up my ideal unicorn candidate. And I know I wasn't going to get it, but it's always useful to have that view, because then when you finish your interview, I'd be kind of going, how close are they to the unicorn? Are they 50, 60, 70, 80%, so that's what I'd kind of do. What's my perfect candidate? And then I'll go through the CV and I'll kind of highlight skills and experience that are relevant to that, to what I think the candidate should have, for the role. And I'll just highlight them and I'll mark areas. I'm going to probe on that. I'm going to probe on that. I'm going to probe on that. And then in the interview, I will go and do that. Then I'll go and drill down and say, oh, so I see you say you've done conceptual modeling and logical modeling. So tell me about that. What did you do? What do you think is the difference between conceptual models and logical models? Should you have many-to-many relationships in logical models then? So I would focus in on something, then just unpack it and see how much they really did know in that particular area. So that's how I would prepare. After the interview, I always write my notes up straight away because it's fresh. And a lot of organizations will need that, because you'll need to submit back to HR a set of detailed notes on what you talked about, competencies evidence, skills evidence. So I always write them up straight away. Literally, I'll come off and then just type them up. It's all fresh. I'll also ask myself, do they people fit? Does it fit? Cultural fit's a really hard thing to define, but I kind of think about, okay, so if I was their manager, I'd have one-to-ones with them every week or every 2 weeks, whatever. And how would I feel that would go? How, just how do I feel about that? If they were going to be my colleague, how would I feel about that? And it's just trying to feel like, does it feel right or not? And I've actually did make an offer a while ago for a data architect who didn't necessarily have all the skills, but I felt that they had that. They were a really good team player. They had excellent communication skills. They would fit really well. They were very proactive. So I gave them an offer of the job, even though they didn't have all the skills I had. So, don't underestimate the kind of fit feel. So that's how I prepare and what I do after the interview. Always diversity is at the forefront of my mind. We need to be able to, it's something that good hiring manager will always be conscious of. So most hiring managers, senior levels, they should have conscious or unconscious bias training. There's no excuse nowadays. They need to realize that diversity is actually a strength, but you need to always check yourself, So just because you're, middle-aged male doesn't mean you're any better. In fact, it might mean you've got to be, you always be aware of this, basically. And I'm very aware of that. So just something to be thought about. So in the interviews themselves, interviews are hard. But you do get better as you go through them. You need to try and relax, build some rapport. And there's a bit of chemistry coming into this. If you can get a bit of humor in it, that's great. Sometimes it doesn't work. You just need to see whether you can build some rapport with the interviewer. Make sure you answer the question that they've asked you rather than just ones you want to answer, because they're asking you questions because they want to find out. And if you don't know, that's fine. You can say, I don't know. But if you're evasive, it doesn't go down very well. You just go, all right, okay, he won't answer or she won't answer what we're asking. I would say develop some strategies for buying yourself time. If you get stumped, have some standard strategies for giving yourself a bit of time to think. So think about it in advance. You can go, oh, that's a very interesting question you've asked me. Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day, actually. Yeah, very interesting. Yes, I was talking about when my colleagues one of those. So you buy yourself a bit of time to actually form in your own head what you're going to answer. So rather than look like a startled rabbit, just kind of have some of these strategies that you can come out to buy yourself some time to think. You're very useful. I would say don't try and take over the interview. I've literally had people who wanted to go through a pre-prepared presentation with me in an interview. So I was like, really? They had prepared a presentation, and all they're going to do is run all the slides. And I go, no, I run the interview and I direct it, not you. So don't do that. It doesn't go down well. So interviews, you do get better. You need to treat it as a bit of a game in some ways, I think. I know sometimes finding work is serious business, but the more you get yourself stressed and worked up, the worse you'll perform, I think. So you have to take it seriously, but not get too stressed about it at the same time. Delicate balance, but you will get better as you do it more. After interview, following up is always an interesting one. Do you follow up after an interview or not? I think it's okay, but it needs to be done carefully. So, if you feel like, and I have done this, if you feel like the interview went really well, your profile fitted really well, you thought it was really good, and then you get rejected, I would probably in that scenario follow up, because I'd be going, well, what did I do wrong? Or did I do anything wrong? And you might very well learn something out of that. You might find that actually there was a set of mandatory skills you hadn't really uncovered, and you didn't demonstrate them. Or you could find actually that the job had actually been, the budget had actually been cut after you interviewed. It might not be nothing to do with you at all. So you might have been great, and they said we loved you, and then their budget was cut, and they couldn't recruit. And that's happened to me in the past. In fact, I've even had someone offer me the job and then turn around and say, we can't take you on because the budget's been cut. So I think in that scenario, asking for feedback's quite useful. If you feel like you were on if you feel the interview didn't really go well, or it was perhaps a bit of a punt, and you kind of went, well, I don't really have the skills and knowledge, but I'll try it anyway, and you get rejected, it's your call really as to whether you go for feedback, because it might be a bit demoralizing if they come back and go, well, you just didn't meet, you weren't any good. So it might be a bit soul destroying for you. So your choice. I tend not to. I tend to get the vibe, and I don't bother if I get the wrong vibe. So finally, if you don't hear back from an interview, they should in the interview, they should say, we'll get back to you in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or we're interviewing between this time and this time. If you don't hear back, do follow up. Well, perfectly, you should expect that people do get back to you, but sometimes, and I've been in this scenario as well, hiring managers get completely snowed under, so you need to cut them a bit of slack sometimes. Sometimes they're just behind, but do follow up. If they say, we're interviewing this week and next week, and then we'll get back to the week after, and they don't, I would follow up. If nothing else, it actually shows interest. In fact, I even had a role many years ago where I followed up, and then they offered me the job after I'd followed up. They rejected me. I followed up. Why did you reject me? And then they offered me the job. So it's an interesting one. So that's interviews. Anything else? So that's all I've got really. Just brain dump of my thoughts, my experiences, and what I think works and what I don't think works. So hopefully that's giving you a bit of an insight into a hiring manager and what we go through, what we like to see and what we don't like to see.
Thank you very much, John. That was great. Really enjoyed that there. Yeah, we'll open the floor to some questions if anyone has any. I had one I could put you on the spot, and it may apply, may not. But John, have you ever been in an interview and found yourself where it's all just gone wrong and the walls are closing in around you and everything is just, gone horribly wrong? Is there any ways you could point out to avoid that happening in future, maybe? Or have you always been ace at them? Or
in terms of the interview's gone disastrously wrong.
Yeah.
Have I ever? I don't think I've ever been in a scenario where it's just gone catastrophically wrong. I have been in ones where I felt that the person interviewing me, I didn't think knew what they were talking about. And I kind of wrap it up quite quickly. You can't, because you've been interviewed, but if you don't feel that person really knows what they're talking about, it becomes quite difficult. But on that role, actually, they offered me the job and I declined because I wasn't going to work for the person, the hiring manager who would be my boss. I wasn't going to work for her because I didn't think she knew what she was talking about. So I've not had a catastrophic interview where I've literally had to walk out, but I have had ones where I just think this isn't right. They don't know what they're talking about, or they don't really understand things. So it's not for me.
Okay, thanks, John. Yeah, I thought I'd try and catch you out anyway.
Like catch me out with that one.
I've got a question from Mary in the chat there. So she says, do you not recommend applicants to use a combination of functional resumes? And also, do you have any tips for career changes and people with maybe gaps in their CV in terms of jobs and stuff?
Yeah, functional resumes. What does she mean by functional resumes? Can you ask her that?
Yeah, Mary, I don't know if you want to turn your mic on, or you can put it in the chat.
I don't know if I know what a functional resume is. It may be a type of resume that I've not used. Yeah. And then, right, but let's address the career change. So if you're trying to do career change, that's a different kettle of fish altogether, isn't it? So you're going from one kind of career to another career. So what you need to do is you need to construct a really coherent story about what you're doing, and also about why are you doing this career change. You need to demonstrate that you've thought intelligently about what you're doing and why you're moving in this new direction, or why you're trying to move in this direction. I think you then need to, in your CV, and I think this will be a completely different CV from a normal CV that I've talked about earlier on. The CV needs to bring out the sort of skills and experience that might be that you used in your previous role, and kind of what's transferable, what can you bring through. And a lot of the softer skills should be transferable between roles, while technical skills generally aren't. Though some are. I mean, if you're a brilliant Excel wizard, you know, that's fairly universally applicable. But a lot of the softer skills, you know, managing meetings, influencing people, communicating, you know, communicating complex ideas in a manner that people can understand, thinking logically and coherently. You know, these sort of things are transferable skills, and I would probably major on those transferable skills that I've identified would be likely to be needed in the target career I'm going to, and try and evidence how I've developed those skills in the past and how I can then apply them in the direction I'm going in the target career. It's tricky though, but that's what I would do.
Okay, thank you. I think Bawesh, you had a question. I don't know if you would like to turn your mic on, or I can say it for you if not. It might overlap here as well in terms of career change. So he says he comes from a social science background and understands less on the data and the cloud. So how can he be more relevant in the job market? In terms of
in which job market? The data job market.
Yes, please. So.
Right. Well, I'm from a geography background.
Me too. That's what I studied. So
there you go.
Yeah, there you go.
So I think if I was trying to get into, say I did social sciences at university, I don't know what your background is, but say I did a social science degree, I would probably do some subsequent training. Now, it may not be go as far as an HND, HNC in software engineering or something like that, but it might be going, right, I'm going to go through a number of, the Azure fundamental certification, for example, going through, showing that I'm interested in the field by doing some additional training, and it actually starts to give you some insight and some background into technology, because you need something, I think, to actually start to unlock the door. The exception sometimes is if it's a pure graduate job, where some big organizations are quite happy to recruit graduates that don't have specific skills because they're just going to train you. So, and that, I mean, obviously I was a graduate many years ago, but, you know, I did geography. I started to get involved with remote sensing and geographic information systems. So I was writing C programs to process Landsat images, but my degree was in geography, and then I went into computing after that. But so I had some sort of kind of knowledge and insight into that career I was trying to target. Now, and I had got that as part of my degree. Now, if you haven't got that as part of the degree, I think you need to build that story up by doing some additional training afterwards. And these courses are available online. You know, there's masses of providers. A lot of them are free. You know, if you set Azure, for example, I talk about Azure there. You can get all that stuff from Microsoft for free. So that would be my recommendation: is build yourself a coherent story about why you're wanting to get into the technology sector, given your background, because you'll be asked in that, and then try and build some hooks in so you shows that you've got an interest in technology and an aptitude for technology.
Nice one, great. Hope that answers your question, and some good pointers there. I think Mary's come back to us just to clarify the. So it was oh, sorry, Yassi, are you going to go? Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Functional CV, was that the functional CV question?
Oh no, this is another one.
Thank you so much, John, for very nice presentation. It's very detailed. I really liked it, and a lot of useful information. Thank you so much. So I was wondering if I'm a junior specialist, project manager. I have IT experience as quality assurance engineer, and now I decided to switch to project management because I really liked it. So do you think it's possible for such specialists to get sponsorship, or it's better to have a little bit more experience, like, I don't know, half of a year, 1 year, or even more, and then apply as a middle or I don't know, higher position?
So you're working as a QA engineer at the moment, are you?
I used to work as a QA engineer. Then I decided to switch to automation. So I studied at Java programming.
Right.
And then I realized that I really like to organize people, to create teams and something like that. So it's project management tasks. I started right now. I'm attending a course of it, and also I have just a little bit practice. I decided to search for a job as a project manager.
Yeah. So the question is, you mentioned time there. About, is it better to work for a bit and then? Just run that. What's the issue about the time?
Just because now I am a junior specialist.
Right.
And to be able to work for UK company, I need a sponsorship. And
right. So this is a visa sponsorship question as well, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So are you on a sponsored visa at the moment?
No.
No. But you're working in the UK at the moment?
No. I'm working I'm not working, I'm just studying, and now I'm based in my current country.
Right. Okay. So if the question is how are you more likely to get sponsorship, right?
Yes.
Normally companies will only sponsor people who, or they're more likely to only sponsor people when they've got skills that they find it hard to source locally, because there is a cost to sponsoring people. There's a whole lot of bureaucracy, and it costs a lot of money to actually, for an organization to actually sponsor a visa. For a UK organization to sponsor a visa, if you see what I mean. So I think it would be quite hard to do that unless you were probably experienced in your field. If you're an experienced test automation engineer, for example, you might very well find someone's going to sponsor you. You know, that's just my opinion. I've been a number of times recruiting people, and they're on sponsored visas, but I've been recruiting at quite a senior level, where I'm looking for experts, and I can't necessarily find the experts locally. Well, there's not that many. The other route in is you quite often these big organizations like Wipro and Tata and stuff like that, they'll actually they'll recruit, you'll work for them, and then they'll put you into the UK, and they'll effectively manage all the sponsorship. But that gives you the route in to actually start to work in the UK. And then after a while, I've seen, and I have interviewed people who have then wanted to go out from those organizations and try and find another organization that would sponsor you, a UK employer that would sponsor you. That can be done. That's another route you could try and go down.
I'm sorry, can you repeat, please? My English is not very good.
All right. So the big consultancy companies like Wipro and Tata and Infosys and things, so they're mainly Indian based, but quite often they'll recruit people into those organizations, and then they'll put them in to work in the UK, and they will manage the sponsorship. They will effectively sponsor you on a specific type of visa. And that allows you to build up experience and also get exposure to the UK. And then once you're in and you've been there for maybe a couple of years, just getting some experience and moving up the experience curve, you could then try and apply for jobs in the UK with UK-based employers who were prepared to sponsor you directly. I have interviewed people who are in that scenario. I haven't actually recruited anybody in that scenario, but I know people do get recruited from these organizations on a sponsored visa.
So it's did I understand correctly? So it is like moving inside from one department in one country to another department for the same company, right?
Exactly. You're moving internally in the company.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll go, I'm based in wherever it is, whatever country it is, but they'll place you internally in the UK, and then from there and they'll manage the visa scenario. I don't know I'm not a visa expert, but they'll presumably there's some sort of internal company visa that will allow them to work in the UK. But I have seen then people then apply when they're in the UK and have been in the UK for a while, then applying for jobs where the employer is prepared to sponsor a visa, they'll sponsor for a job application. They'll sponsor the visa for job application. So it's not, you'd be more likely to go for big organizations. JP Morgan was quite happy to do it, for example. I would suspect smaller organizations aren't going to want the expense, because obviously if an organization sponsors a UK working visa, it actually costs them a lot of money. And it's a lot of bureaucracy, but you never know. I mean, I think the good thing is there's a lot of, we talked about earlier on, a lot of data roles out there. And when you're in a market where there's still a lot of roles and a lot of opportunities, you can make things happen. It's not like it's a declining area, it's an exploding area. So.
I see. Thank you so much. Thank you.
That's grand. I think we're just about there. Just going back to that, what was it? The combinational and functional resume. So I'm just trying to extract from what Mary was typing there, but I believe what she's trying to say is, would you not recommend using a sort of hybrid, so like a chronological and the functional? So one that more focuses on skill sets, for example? What would you say kind of caters, I guess, to what you're maybe applying for?
Yeah, I think my CV's got, first page has got a list of the skill areas. So it'll be talking about, you know, conceptual model, logical modeling, master data management. I'll talk about the data areas I'm particularly expert in, you know, asset management data, so instruments, prices, transactions, for example. But it also has hard skills. So I'll talk about, you know, Azure and list of various components of Azure I'm familiar with. So that's kind of veering probably off towards your functional in terms of the skills. And then after that, I would then flip to, I've doing my CV, then I go into the experience, chronological experience. I'm not saying there's any right or wrong approach, I guess. If you wanted to do purely a functional CV rather than more like an experience-based CV, I would find that quite hard, because I'm quite interested how current experience is, and I want to see what the progression's been. You know, if you're not actually mentioning who you've worked for when you work for it, I feel like I'm not getting a picture of what your journey's been. That makes sense. But I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying I probably find that quite hard to interview against. I think a hybrid's probably where you've got your skills listed at the front. You can address that sort of the more the functional side, and then you've got the experience side after that.